Okay, so today we're going to talk about operant conditioning, which is different from classical, and we'll talk about cognitive learning another day. So operant conditioning is traditional learning. It's more like the kind of learning that you expect when you think about learning, where you do something and you like the result, so you learn to do that. And it's called operant because the learning is based on operating on the environment. Now, operant conditioning is not based on stimulus and response like classical is. It's based on stimulus to response to consequence. So anytime that there's a consequence, it's going to be operant and not classical, okay? Also, these responses are very different from classical responses. The responses are going to be external. They're going to be active. So remember, in classical, they were internal and passive, right? And the responses in operant conditioning are goal-oriented and purposeful rather than involuntary and automatic. So they're voluntary. The person or the learner, animal or person, responds to their environment. They're operating on the environment, and they're doing it to gain a reward, or I could also add there, to avoid a punishment. And the responses are initially brand new. Okay, I'll say more about this, and it'll make more sense as to what I'm talking about in a minute. So the early work on operant conditioning was done by B.F. Skinner. And Skinner used rats or pigeons in something he called a Skinner box. So the Skinner box it was a box like a cage where the animals were presented with certain stimuli, and there was nothing else in there, and it was small and so forth. So basically for the rat, let's talk about the rat first. Skinner made a box that allowed the rat to learn to press a lever. So you have this box, and then you have my rendition of a rat here, okay? There's a lever here that the rat has to learn to press. When it presses the lever, it might get a piece of food. It will get a piece of food. So this is based on stimulus to response to consequence. Now sometimes it's easier to start identifying what is the stimulus, what is the response, and what is the consequence by starting with the consequence. So what is the consequence here? The food. And what does the rat have to do to get the food? It has to press. And what is it pressing? A lever, right? Or a bar. I'll call it a bar. So the rat presses the bar and gets food. You got it? That's the stimulus, response, consequence. Now, this whole concept of operant conditioning is based on Thorndike's law of effect. Now, don't get confused when you see on a quiz or on the test something about Skinner's law. We're not going to talk about any other law except Thorndike's law of effect. So Skinner's law is just trying to throw you off, okay? So the law of effect is the simplest thing anybody could ever become famous for. It makes complete common sense. I'll tell you more about it in a minute. Here's what it is. Skinner's law says that, see, here I am messing you up. Thorndike's law of effect says that if you do something or make a response and the consequence is good, in the future, when you come across that stimulus again, chances are you're going to do that again. And if you do something and you don't like the consequences, next time you're in that situation, you're less likely to do it again. So basically, duh, right? We do something, we like how it turns out, we do it again. We do something we don't like how it turns out, we might not do that again. Probably won't, okay? So what I want you to make sure you understand is that what Skinner's, wow, I'm going to mess you really up. Like now I've messed myself up. What Thorndike's law of effect predicts is future responses. Okay, so if you go back to the previous slide, slide 5, it shows you that it predicts future responses. Okay, let's talk about that. So here's Thorndike's law again. All right, so I don't know what kind of situations you will be in the future. And I don't know what kind of consequences you will receive in the future. But I can predict your future responses based on the consequences you've had in the past. So let's say a little boy sees a bicycle just sitting there with nobody guarding it, and that little boy doesn't have a bicycle, so he takes it. His response is he steals it. And the consequence is that he gets into a load of trouble, okay? So he's in a buttload of trouble with his mom and all of this stuff, right? He gets into big time trouble. Well, the next time he sees something that he wants, he's probably gonna not steal it, right? So the consequence he got will predict the fact that next time he's in that situation, he probably will not make that response. On the other hand, if he sees the bike and he steals the bike, and he doesn't get into much trouble, mom doesn't really ask where it came from or whatever, then what's going to happen is that next time he's in a situation where he can take something he wants, he probably will go ahead and do that behavior or response and steal it. So you see, the consequences you've had in the past are going to predict how you're going to behave in the future. So you can think of it as stimulus or situation, response or behavior, and consequence. So we already talked about in the Skinner box, the stimulus is the bar, the response is to press it, the consequence is food. Now, in operant conditioning, we have to talk about some things that are not an issue in classical conditioning. So what you're going to see here is that at times I will say that something is unique to operant conditioning. And what that means is that you don't see it in classical, but only in operant. So you'll have a quiz that will require you to tell me what is classical and what is operant. For example, extinction. Is it seen in classical or operant or both? The answer is going to be both, right? And then here, when it says response acquisition, the answer would be what? Operant, because I just told you it's unique to operant. In other words, it only happens in operant. So in operant conditioning, the learner has to be taught to make a new external voluntary goal-oriented response. And that's the part that makes it response acquisition, acquiring a response in the first place. So let's talk about classical for a minute. In classical, you learned something new. What you learned new was to make a conditioned response. So in other words, you learned to salivate to a bell instead of food, or tear up at a picture of an onion instead of an onion, and so forth. So basically what you learned is to do something you already knew how to do. Be afraid, be sad, tear up, salivate, right? You already knew how to do that, but what you learn is to do those responses to a new stimulus that you didn't used to do those responses to, right? You got it? So, in operant, this is completely new because these are external, voluntary, goal-oriented responses, and you have to learn the response in the first place. It's not something you're born knowing how to do. So the learner in operant conditioning will be focused on the consequence. Do you remember what they were focused on in classical? Which stimulus? Go for it. Unconditioned stimulus.
Yeah, unconditioned.
Okay. So here's the deal. Let's talk about that for a minute, because there's a question about this on one of your tests or quizzes or something. So in classical conditioning, the US leads to a UR, and the learner is always focused on the US, meaning the food, right? In Pavlov's dog situation, the onion juice in the example we gave on the picture of the onion and the onion juice being paired together. The white rat and the loud noise. Which one was he focused on? The Laubert?
The loud noise.
The loud noise, the unconditioned stimulus. Okay? So the learner, notice, is focused on something that comes before the response. Now, in operant conditioning, you have stimulus to response to consequence, and the learner is focused on this consequence. So now they are focused on something that comes after the response. Okay, remember that, it's on a quiz or test. All right, so the learner will have to be active, whereas the learner in classical was passive. And in classical, you could only learn simple things. Reflexes, likes and dislikes, emotions like fear or sadness. Here, you can learn simple things all the way up to complex things. So a simple thing to learn is when I cry, Mom comes to me and takes care of me. Or when I smile, Mom plays with me. Okay? A complex thing to learn would be, how to drive an automobile or how to drive the space shuttle or whatever. Okay, so the next slide, which is 9, is talking about how response acquisition is unique to operant conditioning, because we don't have to teach these new responses. In classical, the response is something you already know how to do. You just do it to a different stimulus, in response to a different stimulus. In operant, we have to teach a brand new response. So for example, we want to teach the rat to press the bar, okay? Now, the first thing we can do is we can wait for the response to occur coincidentally, okay? And if it occurs coincidentally, then what you would do is you would just go ahead and reinforce it, okay? You also increase the learner's motivation. If you are rewarding the rat with food, then you would keep the rat hungry. If you are rewarding the rat with a drop of water, then you would keep the rat thirsty, okay? And then you limit anything else. There's nothing else to do in that box, okay? And then an active way, something we can use to actively teach a new response in operant conditioning, is called shaping. Shaping means that we are going to reinforce smaller steps to a process, okay? So we're going to reinforce successive approximations to the response we want. Successive meaning in a row, approximation meaning getting closer and closer. So I'm going to show you over here. I'm going to move my video. All right, so here I am. I'm going to be the rat in the Skinner box, okay? And there's nothing else in this box. The box is completely empty. There's nobody else in here, okay? So I'm just sitting in a box. And this lever, the doorknob is going to be the lever that I have to learn to press. Now, if you put a rat in a small space, it's going to explore. And because it's a small space, it will also go up through the walls and do this, right? It'll stand up on its hind legs. And so that's one way that we can teach the animal, because it might accidentally press the lever as it climbs up, okay? As it climbs up, uses the lever to climb up the wall. And then we give them a food pellet, and that would be it. Now, some rats are a little dumber than others, and they're not going to catch that right away, so here's what we're going to do, okay? Let's say you say the first time that he comes into this quadrant or quarter of the box, we're going to give him a reinforcement, okay? So when I just happen to step over here, you're going to throw out some chocolate from under the door, okay? Now I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to eat the chocolate. I'm going to smell it. I'm going to go over here. Remember, you're keeping me really hungry, okay? So maybe you threw out a Hershey's Kiss. Okay, now I eat the Kiss, and I'm going to hang out here now because chocolate happens here, okay? Now, the next thing that you're going to require of me is more than that. You're going successive approximations. So you would never again reinforce me just for coming over here to this quadrant of the room. Now you expect more, okay? So now I'm going to get down on the ground, and this was so much easier to do when I started teaching 30 years ago. Damn it. Okay, so here you go. It's getting up that's going to be a bitch, okay? So here we go. So I'm going to look for chocolate, and you're not going to accept me just touching the floor. Now you're going to require that I touch the upright in order to get some chocolate. So as I go around here being my rat self, when I touch the upright, you give me another Hershey's Kiss. And I eat it, and now I'm like, okay, Hershey's Kiss really do happen here. So now you're not going to accept that anymore. You're going to make an imaginary circle, let's say, around my right lever that I have to press. And over here, this won't work anymore. I have to touch a little bit closer. And when I do that, you give me a Hershey's Kiss, right? And then you make the circle a little smaller. And now this won't work. I have to get right up in it. And the next thing is you make me touch the lever, okay? And you won't ever give me anything for anything less than touching it. And finally, yes, everything creaks. Okay, and finally you make me press the lever. So when I press the lever, now you've got the response that you always wanted, right? And you've taught me step by step to do what you want me to do. So you've reinforced me by shaping me, by reinforcing me for successive approximations to what it is that you want. Okay? Let me see how we're doing on over here. Okay. So once you shape a behavior, you've got it, and you never, whoops, all that going up and down made things happen here. Okay. And you never accept anything less than that. Okay? Everybody understand shaping? Okay. So the next thing we're going to talk about is superstitious behavior. Now, this is a key term, and I can't tell you how many students forget it, because we talk about it, it's like, yeah, I've heard that stuff before, and they don't realize that it is a key term. It's a key term, and the definition is misunderstanding the response that's getting you the consequence that you want, okay? So, when Skinner worked with pigeons peck in a circle. So they peck and they keep going in a circle and they keep pecking and so forth, right? Well, when in the Skinner box, instead of having a lever, what the pigeons had to do was press a disc. So peck a disc that was on the floor level. And some of the pigeons figured out that they press the disc and they get a pellet of food. But some of them misunderstood, and they thought, I have to go in a circle and peck. So they would start by trying to just peck a couple of times and then pecking the disc, and eventually they would just turn in a circle real fast and peck, turn in a circle and peck, and they were doing this, I'm sure, making themselves very dizzy. Okay? So that is superstitious behavior. It's a misunderstanding of what it is that's getting you what you want. You understand? Okay. So sports figures do this. Probably some of you have heard of sports figures who have a particular ritual they have to follow, or something they have to wear, or something they have to do, and they think, if I don't do this, I'm not going to be successful. Now, part of it is kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because let's say they think, oh, I have to wear my college jersey top under my professional jersey top, right? And one day they can't do it for some reason. They forget it and leave it at home, and now they're concerned the whole time. I'm not doing my thing. It feels different. It feels weird, and that affects their performance. So it reinforces them to continue to think, you see, I need that jersey. And we do this all the time. So let's say you have a lucky pair of underpants, okay? And those are the ones you wear when you're going to take a test. And one day you don't have them because you lent them to your friend. And now, so you go and you take the test, and the whole time you're thinking, I'm not wearing my lucky underpants, so I'm not going to do as well, right? And it may affect your performance. And it just reinforces, or, basically the idea, it rewards your thinking that, yes, I need my lucky underpants to succeed. Okay. All right. Now, so this is unique to operant conditioning, okay? Because obviously we are making voluntary responses. All right. So extinction. We talked about extinction in classical conditioning, and we talked about it in operant conditioning now. So it's both. And extinction is, remember in classical, it just meant that the conditioned response weakens until it's lost, right? So it means losing the response, eliminating the response. And in classical conditioning, we achieve this by presenting the CS without the US, so the bell without the food. And remember, there was a gradual decline in the conditioned response. You remember that? I drew that chart, and we saw that it went downhill little by little. Well, operant conditioning is a little different, because the way it's going to work is that the behavior is actually going to increase before it decreases. So if I go over there and pull that lever expecting a Hershey's Kiss from you, and I don't get one, what am I going to do? I'm going to do it again. I'm going to keep pressing it like, what the hell is wrong with this thing? Where's my Hershey's Kiss, right? So you go out and you try to start your car and it doesn't work, and you don't just walk away and buy a new one. You probably want to, but you don't. You keep trying to start it, right? So in operant conditioning, the way extinction happens is instead of a gradual decline that we see in classical, we see in operant that the behavior increases before it decreases. So parents take their kids to a psychologist. They tell us, hey, this kid's having tantrums. We always start by asking the parent, do you ever give in? And if the parent's honest, they say, yes, occasionally I do, or more often than not, or whatever they say, right? Because it's just too much, I can't handle it. We're at the store, they're throwing a complete hissy, it's just easier to grab the candy bar and go, okay? So the first thing you tell them is, okay, well, you can never, ever give in. Because if you give in, you're teaching them that, hey, if you have a tantrum, you'll get what you want, right? So if it's a good psychologist, they'll explain to the parent that the tantrums are going to get worse before they get better. Because the first time the kid has a tantrum and you don't give in, the kid's going to try having a bigger tantrum, right? Until you give in. So you have to wait it out. You know, you got to stay with it and hold your ground for a while. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is generalization. When we talked about generalization in classical conditioning, you might have gotten the impression that it's a bad thing. Because think about the examples we talked about. A dog bites you and now you're afraid of all dogs. Well, that's not good, right? Little Albert, right, was made to fear a white rat, and then he's afraid of all kinds of furry things. So that's not good, right? So generalization is not good or bad in and of itself. It just is. In operant conditioning, we see how very important it is that we have this ability to generalize. Because what happens is that it allows us to do things that we've never done. So I can steal your phone, and I can use your phone, okay? Or I can use your computer. You can drive my car, right? You can tell time on my watch, even though you didn't learn to tell time on my watch. And I didn't learn to use a phone or a computer, right, on your computer or your phone, and you didn't learn to drive on my car. So we learn on one thing, and we continue, right, to generalize what we learn to other similar objects. You got it? So let's say you're trying to go through that door, and you're going to try to push or to pull or to turn and pull or to turn and push, right? You're going to try all the things you know about how to get through a door. Okay. Stimulus discrimination is also in classical and operant. And this is the opposite. Remember when in stimulus discrimination in classical, the example was, for example, the ding and the dong thing, right? So you could teach the dogs to actually salivate to ding and not to dong by going ding and feeding them and occasionally throwing in a dong and not feeding them and going back to ding and so forth. Well, discrimination in operant conditioning means that you realize in this situation I have to do something different. Okay, so I'm going to give you two examples from my life. One of them is that my office now is on the second floor, but it used to be up on the third floor. And when it was up on the third floor, I had this weird door. So most doors, you know, office doors, you turn it, you put the key in and you turn it, and then you open the, you know, you turn the knob, and it very lightly opens, right? Not this one. This one would get stuck. So I would have to put the key in and turn it, and then push the lever down, and then I had to bang it with my shoulder to unstick it. Now, if I did that to every door, I'd probably be flying through a lot of doors, right, that didn't need it. But luckily, I discriminate, and I don't do that to every door. I only did it to that door because that door needed it, okay? Another example, I used to have a car back in the 80s. I had a Camaro, and this Camaro, it had this special anti-theft device. And what you had to do is the cruise control was right on the turn signal, and you had to push it in order to turn on the car. If you tried to turn the car on without pushing that, nothing would happen. So you had to do this. Now, I don't go around pushing the cruise control on every car, but on that car, I distinguish it. I discriminate. In other words, tell the difference between that car and another car by going, oh yeah, I have to push in the cruise control to start this car. You understand this? Okay, so we're about to go to something that's similar but very different, okay? It's brand new to operant conditioning. It's called a discriminative stimulus. So that was stimulus generalization and stimulus discrimination, and now we have a discriminative stimulus. It's only an operant. I'm going to ask you in a minute to tell me why, okay? So a discriminative stimulus is a stimulus that tells us if we should make a certain response, if it's going to get us the consequence we want, or when to make a certain response to get the consequence we want, or which response to make to get the consequence we want. So in the Skinner box, we can put a light. And the light, when it's on, if the rat presses the bar, it gets a pellet of food. But when the light is off, the rat does not get a pellet of food, no matter how many times he or she presses the bar. Okay? So this light serves as a discriminative stimulus. It tells the rat if it should make a response now or when to make it. Okay? You got it? All right. Here's another example. Let's say that you are at an intersection. Okay? So you're driving and you come to an intersection, and so that's your stimulus. Now your response, you don't know what you should do at that light. Your consequence, what you want, is to get through there safely. The light, okay, or the sign, stop or yield or whatever, tells you, it's the discriminative stimulus that tells you which response should I make. Should I go? Should I stop? Should I yield? Which is the one that's going to get me through the intersection safely? Okay? Now, discriminative stimuli do not have to be just signs. I mean, they can be. They can be lights and signs. Like when you go to a vending machine and it says out of order, it tells you, don't even try it. Don't even put your money in. You're going to lose it. If it says this one's sold out, then that means don't pick this one, right? Okay? So it tells you what to do. But they don't have to be signs. Like, for example, in my class, if you want to say something, you know you can just talk out, right? You can just say it. But in some classes, the professor would be appalled because they expect you to raise your hand. So I serve as the discriminative stimulus telling you that you can just talk. And your other professor is the discriminative stimulus that tells you, oh, I need to raise my hand. So here, if you have a question, you just talk, right? But in other classes, you don't. And which professor is standing in front of you tells you, how should I behave? You with me? All right, now why would this only be in operant? Somebody tell me, why would this not apply to classical but only to operant?
Because there's a consequence.
Because what?
There's a consequence.
There is a consequence, and that's a good one. But what about the response is different?
It's voluntary.
Huh?
It's voluntary. Like
It's voluntary, absolutely, yes. Those are two really good ways. The answers were there's a consequence, and the other answer is it's a voluntary response. And those are very good ways to determine if something is operant, okay? So this is only in operant because it helps the learner decide which response to make. And in classical, the learner doesn't have control over their responses, right? They're all involuntary. So the examples are the light in the Skinner box, the out of order sign on a vending machine, and some of the others I gave you. All right, so now we're going to complicate our formula just a little bit. Okay, so the formula is going to be complicated once again for you next time too, but stimulus to response to consequence, okay? And we're going to complicate it because we're going to talk about two different kinds of consequences. One kind of consequence is called reinforcement. And reinforcement, a reward or a reinforcer, means that the definition is any consequence that leads to an increase in responses in the future. Okay? The other type of consequence is punishment. And punishment is defined as any consequence that leads to a decrease in responses in the future. Okay? Now I want you to use that definition. Remind me your name again. Why can't I ever remember your name?
Malcolm.
Malcolm, that's right, because it's like a normal name, that's why. Okay, so I'm going to walk up to Malcolm, and I'm going to call him a dirty name. And Malcolm is going to sock me one good. And I'm going to get up off the ground, and I'm going to call him a dirtier name, okay? Now you tell me, based on my definitions, did he reinforce or punish me?
Reinforce.
He reinforced me because I did it again. Apparently I like getting my butt beat, okay? So obviously he meant to punish me probably, right? Don't do that again. I'm going to beat you until you stop. But I did it again. So the real definition is that it was reinforcement because it occurred again. You got it? Okay. Remind me your name.
Isabel.
Isabella, right? Okay, so Isabella is going to go and play the lottery. And by the way, do you think I feel bad for forgetting your names? Let me explain to you why I don't. You guys can't remember what the hell I teach you. Okay? So when y'all remember what I teach you, I'll remember your names. Okay? There we go. How about that? Okay, I know your other professors are all trying to remember your name. I'm like, you try to remember what I say and let's forget about these names. Okay, sorry. Isabella. Okay. She goes and plays the lottery, okay? And she wins. We all want to be her bestie. Now, she never plays the lottery again. Did winning the lottery reinforce or punish her?
Punish her.
It punished her because it happened. It didn't happen again. It happened less. Okay? Now, obviously, those are crazy examples, okay? And I'm not going to give you crazy examples on the exam. On the exam, I might give you an example like, I'm gonna give my dollar, my dollar. I have more dollars than kids, thank God. Okay, I'm gonna give my kid $1 for every book they read this summer. And you know I'm trying to do what?
Reinforcement.
To reinforce them because you assume that the kid likes the dollar, right? And that I want them to read more, okay? So that will not be a hard example. Okay, so there are two primary kinds, or two basic kinds of reinforcements. They fall into these two categories, is what I'm trying to say, not so eloquently. All right, a primary reinforcer is something that is in and of itself reinforcing, okay? So examples are fulfillment of a drive, food when you're hungry, water when you're thirsty, warmth when you're cold, sex when you're feeling frisky. I'm on tape here, people, okay? This is gonna go on YouTube, I gotta watch myself. Okay, and then attention at a very, very, very basic level. Not like, look at my flashy clothes or look at my flashy car. Attention, like children, newborns and babies will die without basic attention, okay? All right, so very basic stuff. Now, a secondary reinforcer is something that we use to get something more primary, okay? So, the best example in our society is money. Money is only useful if you can trade it in for something. So if you've ever lived in a country like I did, where all of a sudden the money didn't matter, right? Because I'm from Cuba, so when the Castro took over, that was it. And all the money you had didn't matter, it's different money and so forth like that. So money doesn't matter unless you can turn it in. Another example is in a movie from the 80s maybe called Cliffhanger with Stallone. And in this movie, he's trying to catch the bad guys, and they're dropped from helicopters on this mountain. It's very snowy, and they have these big bags of money, and you know, they're trying to find these people and so forth. Well, it gets so cold that at one point they take the money and they burn it for warmth, okay? So at that point, it was more important to stay warm,
Was it on
right?
Netflix?
More primary, huh?
Was it on Netflix?
It may be, I don't know.
I think I know what you said.
Yeah, it's a long time ago. Cliffhanger is the name of it. But anyway, so money in that case was more important to just burn, right? So how about academic grades? What do you think? Are they primary or secondary? I'm hearing secondary, right?
Primary.
They're secondary because you can't do a damn thing with your academic grades unless you can trade them for something. So in my classes, I've had people who are medical doctors in other countries. I've had lawyers. I've had nurses. I've had an architect. I've had a psychologist from China. And these people are all back here at Intro Psych because their degrees don't transfer from one country to the other. So your academic grades are secondary. You use them to get credits, to get a diploma or a certificate, so that you can then get a job, so that you can then get money, so you can go out and buy food, water, warmth, sex, and all the stuff. Okay? All right. So, yeah, you buy sex. I said it. Okay. So we're going to pick up on schedules of reinforcement next time. We're going to skip this part, and we're going to move to punishment. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about punishment. Now, punishment is any consequence that eliminates or decreases a response in the future. And punishment is not recommended by most psychologists. I'm a little bit of an exception, but there are three things that are very important for punishment to work: the timing, the intensity, and the consistency. They spell out tick, right? So the timing means that punishment needs to be given immediately after the response that you want to eliminate. And it's always best to do immediate, but it's especially important in little children and young animals, okay? So I don't have experience with young children, but I do have experience with young animals, young dogs. So a little dog, they tell you, don't come home and beat the hell out of your puppy for peeing on the carpet. Because what the dog learns is what happened together. You come home, I get the hell beat out of me. That's what happened, okay? And then one of my students asked me once, what if you rub their nose in the urine? Then they learned this. You come home, I get the hell beat out of me. Part of you beating the hell out of me is rubbing my nose in the carpet, okay? So it doesn't work. That's not what they learn. Now, older dogs are different. I had a dog that was a revenge peer, okay? Do you know what I'm talking about? Any of you have revenge peers? No? Or cats? My God, cats are the worst at that, okay? So my dog he hated one of my girlfriends at the time. I should have, well, he turned out to be a better judge of character than I was. Let's just put it that way. Because she was one of those little Hostess Twinkie snacks. What do you call those things? I'm not going to say it. You figure it out. Anyway, she cheated on me, okay? What can I say? And by the way, occasionally in life you have moments that you have to really hang on to for the rest of your life. because you do something right, okay? Like something really good. And I'll tell you about my moment right now. Here was my moment. We just broke up. That night I come home to pick up some stuff. I walk in and some other guy's sitting there with his arm around her on the couch. And her kids are, my stepkids are right there. Okay, now we weren't married. We were just living together in sin. Okay, so not as often as I'd like, though. The sin part, I mean. Okay, so we, y'all even getting what I'm saying? No? Okay. So my kids are sitting there, and I had a moment of just complete intelligence where I walked in, and I said, "Hi, how are you? I guess you know who I am," to him. And then I turned immediately to the kid that I trusted the most, and I said, "And how long have we known this man?" And got my answer right there as to how long that had been going on. You see what I mean? Y'all are not picking up on the beauty of this moment for me, okay? You're ruining it, but that's okay because I hang on to that forever. I got another one I'll tell you about another time, another beautiful moment. So,
What happened after that?
well, I had a few things to say to her about us breaking up. Okay. So the timing was really important with this dog, right? Because he really hated her. And he would go in the timing was not important to him because he was older. So he would go in our closet. There's a big, long closet. It's L-shaped. And he would go in and he would lift his leg and pee on her clothes, take a step and pee, take a step and pee, and do this until he got to my clothes. So he knew and he did a bunch of other stuff, but that's just what I'm going to tell you today. But he knew why he was peeing. It was because you pissed me off, and I'm going to pee on your stuff. And so timing is only important for animals that are young and for people that are young. So, for example, you and I could go to jail for something we did 10 years ago, and we'd know why we were there, right? But a baby is not going to understand you're in trouble now for something you did a long time ago. All right, intensity. Punishment should be very intense. If it's not intense enough, it just doesn't work. So, for example, parents send their children to their rooms, but these days the rooms are like Disneyland, right? So the kid's like, whatever, I don't care. In fact, I had another story, different woman, also living with her, 3 girls this time. One of the girls is a tween, okay? And I don't know what happens to tween girls and their mothers, but oh my God, okay? She started mouthing off to her mother, and I would be like, step back. You are going to die, child. Your mother's going to take you out, okay? Because just the stuff she would say. So her mom and I are talking, and I was like, don't send her to her room. Send her to, we had a formal living room, the kind with no TV or anything, just a place to sit, right? Like nobody uses. And I said, send her to the formal living room because there's nothing to do there. So the next time that she mouths off, we had just come in, we're putting away groceries. The little baby girl starts talking, okay? And mom's like, go to your room. And then she's like, no, go to the living room, because she remembered our conversation, right? And here's the little girl, right? No, I want to go to my room. So I just proved it, right? That going to your room is not punishment. Which going to the formal living room, now that sucked. There's nothing to do there. All right. So punishment has to be intense for it to matter. Now, also with that woman, the oldest daughter, she would do things, and we would get her, and she'd be in trouble, and it's like, okay, you can't use your phone. Okay, you can't be on the computer. Okay, you can't go out. Okay, you can't do this. And it didn't matter. Nothing fazed this kid. So we never found what kind of punishment would faze that child, because everything was like, okay, all right. So she'd just sit there. And it's like, what is wrong with you? Most kids would be upset. All right, consistency. This is the most difficult one. Consistency means that a punishment a behavior, needs to be punished every single time it happens for punishment to really work. And how many of you in here are parents? Just one? Okay. So you probably know that's the hardest thing, right? Because just because you punish the behavior don't mean they're going to happen over here and you weren't around to punish it and so forth. Now, Consistency, though, is extremely important. So let me see a show of hands. How many of us have had a speeding ticket?
Ooh.
That's it? Where's the rest of you? What, do y'all ride bikes or what? What's going on? Am I not seeing some of you? What's going on? Okay, well, that's not a lot of you. Okay. So, how many of you stopped speeding after the speeding ticket forever? You've never sped again? Liar.
I got 2 tickets, I think.
Was it today? Was it this morning?
No. It was like 2 months ago.
Okay, and you've never sped since?
That was my first time I ever got a ticket. And then I was speeding home because I was late because I had to do something. So I was driving my dad's car. It wasn't my car. And so I was going on the street that I've always been driving on. And so happened the cop was there the same night. But I didn't see him at a stop sign that I was at. But I got 2 tickets because the first ticket was from the stop sign that I was at, but there was no cops. But while I was going home, he pulled me over because he said he apparently saw me at that stop sign. But I didn't see him.
Okay, so you ever like look down and go, oh crap, I'm speeding?
I mean, yeah.
Okay, so you do speed. You just don't speed intentionally maybe as much. Okay, so the point is that everybody in here who had a ticket, it has not stopped us from speeding. The consistency of our getting tickets for speeding is horrible. How many times do you speed? Every time you get in a car, basically. Unless you're moving the car down to the other side of the driveway or something, you're speeding. You don't even know you're speeding sometimes, right? You look down and you're like, oh, geez, I'm going way faster than I thought I was. And so what? So what you usually do there is just look for a cop and keep going. Okay. But anyway, the point is that we are not consistently punished for speeding. I haven't gotten a ticket, knock on wood, in so long. Okay? It's been many years, and over a decade. Okay? So that's not because I haven't sped. Okay? It's just because you get pulled over so infrequently compared to the amount of time that you speed. So speeding a ticket is not going to do it. So let's talk about speeding tickets and compare them to all of these, okay? The timing, well, you get your ticket now. You have the option a month later or so, you got to go to court, right? You can put off that court date and continue to put it off. You can get on a payment plan. You have all these kinds of things, but it's not an immediate punishment, okay? The intensity. Well, the intensity, like let's say, how much is your ticket? Was your ticket? Do you remember? Or together, 2 of them, they were like what? $250?
It was like
600 for 2, yeah. Yikes. Okay.
And I had to pay it in my own pocket. My dad.
Well, yeah.
Even though it wasn't in my car.
It was. He wasn't driving though. Yeah. Okay. So the car didn't speed. You did. You understand that, right? That's why Dad's not here. Okay. All right. So in some countries, what they do is they have you. The speeding ticket is based on a percentage of your income, right? Which would be. It depends. If you're poor, is fine. But if you're rich, okay, for example, one time I got a ticket and it was $250, and this was a million years ago, and it was in October, which is my birthday month, and I like to do a lot of stuff, and it was one of these days, like we have sometimes here in Houston in October, right? The days are just gorgeous. So I walk in, I'm going to take defensive driving, okay? Here I go, early in the morning on a Saturday, and I walk into the cruddiest room you've ever seen, with no windows and just horrid, terrible room. And I said, there's no way I'm spending my Saturday in this room. There's no way. So I got up, I wrote a check, I put it in the mail, and I went about my day. That's because I could afford $250. If it would have been $2,500, my butt would have been sitting in that room, okay, for 8 hours. And for some people, $250 is like $25 for me, right? For other people, like for me, $250, which is affordable for me, they can afford $2,500. So I can't afford $2,500. For some people, it has to be 25,000 before they'll blink. So if you think about it, a percentage of your income hurts a lot of people. So all the lawmakers that are making these laws and going, okay, yeah, let's make it 250 for speeding, they can pay 250 like you and me can pay 25. You with me? Right? So if it's a percentage of their income, they might go, ouch, wait a minute, hold on. Because what might be $25 ticket for some might be $2,500 or more for others. All right. So the intensity, obviously, for speeding is not that bad for some people, but for others it is. Consistency, we already talked about how in speeding that's particularly bad. Now, what if there was a magic speed police, okay? And here's what happened in our magical speedless world. The second you sped 1 mile over the limit, okay, timing is immediate, your car would stop. It just wouldn't go anymore. And very quickly would descend upon you the speed police. And the speed police would take you in and you'd spend a month in jail. And they would take away your license for a year and fine you $10,000. Okay? So every single time you do it, you're getting this very intense punishment immediately. Would you speed? Hell no. I'd probably buy a bike just to make damn sure I didn't speed. Okay? You with me? Or take Uber everywhere. It's not me. I ain't speeding, right? So if this is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fact that intensity and the timing intensity and the consistency of a punishment really makes a difference. Now, there's some other things about punishment that are some of the reasons why psychologists don't recommend it too. The first thing that punishment teaches you, the main thing, the primary thing, the thing that stands out above all else is, wow, that really sucked. I don't want to get punished anymore. Okay, so it teaches you to avoid punishment in the future. So when I had this class and I was teaching this class a while back, a student said, what I learned from getting a ticket is to buy a radar detector. So in other words, they learned how to avoid punishment. That was my exact example. All right, so you don't eliminate the behavior, you suppress it. So you don't speed around cops, or if there was a certain place that you got ticketed, you know how you kind of are more careful now in that area? Okay, so the learner, you don't unlearn the response. The learner doesn't unlearn the response, and you don't learn an alternative behavior. And it can make you angry and aggressive if you feel like you can do something to avoid the punishment. You'll do whatever it takes. Also, it can make you angry and aggressive if you think you're being punished unjustly. Now, the last thing is it can make people stop attempting. So let's say you have 3 tests for a class and you study more each test and you fail all 3 tests. At some point you're going to be like, you know what? To hell with this. I'm not going to study anymore. Okay? Hopefully that won't happen. Now, we're going to talk in here sometimes about little Johnny. So little Johnny says a bad word, and his mother washes his mouth out with soap. And Johnny, of course, learns, wow, that really sucked. I don't want to have my mouth washed out with soap again. But he didn't eliminate the word from his vocabulary because maybe around his friends when he uses it, they think it's funny. And he didn't unlearn the response. And he didn't learn an alternative. So Johnny is in his room upstairs playing with his friends. The door is closed, and his annoying little brother Timmy has got his head, his ear to the door, and he's listening to what they're doing. And Johnny says that bad word. And while his friends are laughing, Timmy cannot help himself. He opens the door and says, I'm telling Mom you said that bad word. Okay, now what's Johnny going to do? What? What? He's going to stop him. Beat him up. Do whatever it takes. So Johnny is primarily motivated to avoid punishment, and if that means killing your brother, so be it. Okay? You with me? Whatever it takes. So let's say Timmy escapes with his life, and he runs downstairs, and he's like, Mom, Johnny said that bad word. Okay? So mom gets pissed and she comes up the stairs. Johnny, did you say that bad word? And what does Johnny say?
No.
No, he's a liar. So let's see what happened. So you started out with a foul-mouthed little sailor for a kid. Now you have a lying, homicidal, foul-mouthed little sailor for a kid. And so this is why they say don't use punishment, because now the kid is motivated to avoid it to the point where they'll lie or whatever else they have to do it, including killing their brother. Okay? Now, we're going to talk about two types of learning that are based on punishment, and then we'll be done for the day. The first is called escape learning. So I'm going to put this over here so you can see that. That's not good. Okay. All right. So escape learning means that you have a stimulus, and that stimulus is some sort of punishment that has already begun. And you're going to learn to make a voluntary, external, active, in other words, operant response to escape, to have the consequence be escape from the punishment. So think of escape learning as somebody who's already in prison. They're already being punished, right? And they have to do something like dig a hole or whatever the heck you do to get out of prison. To get out of prison when you're trying to get out. Okay? So they do these studies where they put a dog in a cage and they have a partition here. And all of a sudden they start shocking the bottom of the cage on the side that the dog is on. And the dog will usually yipe and come over here to this side. They'll jump. And when they get to this side, there's no electricity going on here. So the dog feels a shock, which is the stimulus. And what they do is they jump, and the jump allows them to escape the shock. You got it? Let's think about little Johnny. Little Johnny is already getting his mouth washed out with soap. He has to learn to do something in order to escape the washing. So what could he do? While the washing is taking place, what could he do? Kill Timmy. His mom's got him face down in the sink with soap in his mouth.
Throw up.
He could throw up. That might stop mom. He could hold his breath and it turns blue, so mom might stop. He might try to wiggle and get away from mom, right? Which one of those do you like? Which one do you like?
Go face.
Huh? He could fake a seizure. That's the best one I've ever heard. Sorry, I got to take that one. Fake a seizure. That's awesome. Okay, so he could pretend to be seizing. So it flips out his mom and his mom stops washing. I like you. I bet you were a fun kid. Okay. Okay. And your mother is probably in a mental institution from you making her crazy. All right. So here we go. The next type of learning that we're going to talk about is avoidance learning. This is a learning based on punishment. Now, when you avoid something, you never have to go through it, right? Avoidance learning. So in avoidance learning, the stimulus is not going to be punishment. It's going to be some sort of signal that punishment is coming. Okay? And the response is to do something voluntary, external, active, in order to avoid the punishment. That's the consequence. Avoid the punishment in the first place. Okay? So, what they do with the dogs here is they put the dog in the cage with the partition, and they ring a bell, and then they start to shock that side of the cage, and the dog will jump over to the side that's not shocked. And they keep doing this back and forth. And what will happen is that soon, the dog learns, when I hear that bell, I should jump and avoid the shock in the first place. You with me? So the dog hears the bell, and it jumps, and it avoids the shock. Okay? So little Johnny, he hears a signal that he's about to get punished. Probably mom's voice, right? She sounds really mad. And what does he do to avoid punishment? What did I tell you he did? He lied, right? So little Johnny lies, no, right? And by lying, he's trying to avoid getting punished. If mom believes me, then she won't wash my mouth out with soap. So she's avoiding the washing, if you want to put it more specifically. Okay? Everybody with me? Now listen up. I got a dog and a bell here. When's the last time we saw a dog and a bell?
Classical.
Huh?
The classical.
In classical conditioning with Pavlov's dogs.
Yeah.
Why is there a dog and a bell and this is operant? Why is this one operant instead of classical?
Because there's consequence.
The response is what? Is what?
A consequence.
There's a consequence, you're right. That's step one. What else is there?
U.S.
There's no US. You see a US?
Just choosing to do
There, it's a choice, okay? This is a voluntary external active response. So jumping, the dog jumping is not the same as the dog salivating. Salivating is involuntary, jumping is voluntary. Okay? That's the difference. You're going to be given a quiz where you're going to be given all kinds of stuff, and you got to say, is it classical or operant? If it's an involuntary response that the learner makes, it's classical. If it's voluntary, it's operant. You got it? Any questions? Okay.